Welcome back to another tutorial. In this video we're going to have a look at mixing in the bass line or the bass synths along with the drums from the previous videos. I'm going to start here with the sub bass against the kick, as that's going to be the most important relationship and foundation which the rest of the bass layers are going to sort of sit on top of. So I'm just going to play the sub bass on its own for a second, so we can hear. There are a few issues with the render of this. Not only has it kind of been normalized, but it's quite clicky at the ends and the starts of some of the notes. There's a bit of problems here with the envelope. We can see that that's probably snapping down a bit too fast, creating a few clicks and pops, which is a little problematic, and we're going to deal with some of those rogue frequencies with the channel EQ. But let's just have a listen to it now. So this is a sine wave bass line, and in theory we should only be really hearing that fundamental there. And we're going to just turn up the rate of decay a touch so it's a bit quicker, so we can kind of see the notes here clustered up in the sub area between sort of 40 Hertz and up to 80 or 100 Hertz. But we still have all this extra energy here caused by these little clicks. So I'm going to put in a low pass filter with an extremely steep 48 dB per octave slope. Normally I wouldn't recommend that, but this is going to need quite a bit of work here. So we've managed to get rid of a lot of these higher frequency clicks. You can see how high into the frequency spectrum, even though they're very low amplitude by comparison to the fundamental, because there's nothing in the way, you can still hear this. There's no frequency masking going on, so you can really hear those clicky parts of the frequencies between sort of maybe 200 Hertz and about a K. But with that 48 dB per octave filter on, it kind of really really gets it's not had any shelf EQ to the sub bass. It really kind of gets rid of any of those clicks and pops in this particular instance, which is quite good. I'm also sort of maybe counterintuitively going to actually get rid of some of the really extreme lows. Anything below 30 Hertz we really don't need, so it's going to cut some of those extreme lows. The cutoff point actually starts a little bit or the EQing starts a little bit ahead of the cutoff point here at 30 Hertz. So it's just going to nip a few of those down a few dB to get rid of some of the really extreme low stuff as well. So we can hear that's immediately much better on that kind of clicky poppy version. I'm going to put in some metering here as well. I'm going to put in the level meter. I'm going to change it to peak and RMS, because I'm not really too bothered about the peaks, particularly for the sub bass, but to know that going from note to note that the levels are relatively solid, I actually want to check out what the average level of the bass line is during this kind of riff. And we can see that RMS is relatively solid there at kind of -6 between all the notes. It jumps up and down a little bit, there is a bit of fluctuations there, but in the main that's pretty solid. So in this instance I don't really need to do much treatment. I don't really need to put any compression on there. The riff does change here at the drop a touch. It's much less melodic, and it's just holding down the kind of root notes, so the chord progressions of the track later on. So this might be worth checking with the metering as well. But again, that's pretty solid, it's pretty stable during that section there where the pitches change, even though it's mainly a pedal note. And they might be slightly louder on those higher pitches, but it's basically pretty consistent and pretty solid. So I think we can leave that alone. We can probably get away with zero compression there. in the traditional sense. Now, this riff, if I just circle in on a few bars here of the drop, we can see that it actually starts on the kick, so it's playing sort of eighth note patterns. So you're going to get on every kick there will be a note, which we need to kind of duck out the way with sidechain compression as soon as we have the kick in there. So I'm going to put in the multi-band sidechain compressor. I've got here this shaper box volume, and everything from the low end for that first 16th note, that first part of that rhythm, is going to be ducked out of the way completely to leave space for the kick in there. So I'm just going to bypass that for a second and put the kick back in. I can kind of hear that the kick and bass isn't completely transparent in this section. So if I turn on this multi-band sidechain compressor, it's just going to duck that out the way to that volume envelope. Every 16th note, every 16th note of the bar is going to get, or every 8th note, sorry, of the bar, the first 8th note is going to duck it out of the way and then just let it up a little bit for the second 8th note of that bar. So it's relatively subtle, but it just tightens up those two bits together, and that will be very apparent in the bassline entry section. If I put that in here, it will really help create space for that kick drum to pull through. And we can also see and hear on the meter that this section is actually technically louder in terms of RMS level than the next section. So we might need to look at that later on when we come to do a bit of volume shaping and automation. But our sub bass there is about minus 16 dB, and it's worth checking what our kind of rough peak level is for our kick sub mix, which is about minus 14. So the sub bass is a couple of dB beneath the kick in terms of level. So we're making the kick slightly more predominant, which makes sense at this stage because we also don't have the rest of the basses in. When we have a look at adding in these mid basses, the overall balance of the bass versus the kick should be a little bit closer. We should bridge that gap by a couple of dB here so that the kick and the bass feel, or certainly the lower parts, maybe not so much with the acids and the top parts, but they should feel relatively comparable in terms of level.